My name is Eva, and on February 3rd, I learned just how dangerous it can be when privilege meets arrogance. Especially when the person holding both believes money is just a toy. It began like any other Tuesday morning. I was in the finance department by 7:15 a.m. The quiet hum of the office, my favorite soundtrack before the chaos started. Coffee in hand, I was reviewing quarterly projections for our European expansion, a project I'd spent the past year building from scratch. Numbers were strong, clients were confident. For once, everything felt stable. When I heard the click of expensive heels on polished marble, I looked up to see her. Isabella Hartley, 27 years old. Daughter of our CEO, special advisor to the board. The title was as meaningless as it sounded. She had no background in finance, no credentials, and no apparent understanding of how our company worked. But what she did have was influence, and that in her mind meant she could tell anyone what to do. Eva, she said sweetly in that fake nice tone I'd learned to distrust. I need you to process a wire transfer. 250,000 urgent. Today. I sat down my coffee. For what department? She flashed a smile. It's for a consulting firm I'm bringing in. They'll help us modernize operations. Her voice dripped with condescension on the word modernize, like my team was still doing the books on parchment. Glanced at the request form she slid across my desk. No vendor ID, no contract, just a bank account number and the name of a firm I'd never heard of. I'll need documentation, I said evenly. Signed approval from the CFO, a vendor profile and proof of services. She tilted her head, that practiced look of amusement barely hiding her irritation. Eva, I'm telling you to do it. My father knows. Just make it happen. Seen this game before. New consultants hired at her whim, invoices for work that never happened, and budgets blown on pet projects that vanished without results. But never at this scale. 250,000 was not petty cash. It was a red flag the size of a football field. I can't process undocumented transfers, I said, my tone calm but firm. Company policy. Her smile vanished. Do you know who I am? Yes, I replied, which is why I'm following the rules. For a moment she just stared at me, her face flushing pink. Then she leaned in, voice low. You don't process that transfer, you won't have a desk to sit at tomorrow. My heart rate spiked, but I held her. Then I guess tomorrow will be interesting. She straightened, collected her form, and walked out without another word. I knew in my gut this wasn't over. At night I couldn't shake the conversation. Was the consulting firm just another overpriced vanity project or something worse? The finance world is full of shell companies and advisors that exist solely to move money quietly. I'd seen enough headlines to know how those stories end. Still, I told myself I'd done the right thing. If I lost my job over protecting the company from a fraudulent transaction, so be it. Next morning my phone buzzed at 8:12 a.m. CEO's office. Eva, can you come in? The CEO's assistant didn't bother with pleasantries. When I stepped into Robert Hartley's office, Isabella was already there, perched on the arm of his leather chair like a cat that had just caught a bird. Eva, Robert began, his voice clipped. Effective immediately. Employment with Hartley International is terminated. My stomach lurched, but I kept my face neutral. Reason. He leaned back, avoiding my eyes. Loss of trust. Will arrange for your belongings to be sent to you. Security will escort you out. Glanced at Isabella. She was smirking. I thought of the clean, documented record I'd kept of every suspicious request over the past year. Not just hers, but her father's too. Every transaction that didn't add up, every deviation from compliance procedures, every time they tried to bypass oversight. I nodded slowly. Understood, and then I left, calm, head high. Exactly 58 minutes later, as I was finishing a cappuccino at the cafe across the street, my phone lit up with a text from Jenna, our receptionist. Please. Two of them just walked in. I stared at the screen, a strange mix of dread and vindication swirling in my chest. Whatever was about to happen, I knew one thing. The game had just changed. From my spot in the cafe I could see straight through the glass lobby doors of Hartley International. 2 uniformed officers stood inside. One speaking to Jenna at the reception desk, the other scanning the ID badge scanner like he was assessing the place. My phone buzzed again. Jenna, they're asking for Robert and they have papers. I sat back in my chair, watching the scene unfold through the fogged-up window. Pedestrians walked past with takeaway coffees, completely unaware that inside that glass tower, something had just cracked open. Exactly 1 hour earlier I'd been marched out of that same lobby. My key card deactivated before I'd even reached the elevator. A year of building financial stability for the international division gone with a 5-minute meeting and a vague loss of trust. But here's the thing about people like Robert and Isabella Hartley. They believe firing someone erases the problem. They never consider that the person they're firing might have been the only one keeping the dam from bursting. The first sign that the police weren't there for a casual chat came when Jenna stepped away from her desk, phone pressed to her ear, eyes wide. She mouthed something toward the glass. It's bad. A few seconds later, Robert appeared from the elevator. Perfectly tailored suit, silver cufflinks, that trademark half-smile he used in investor meetings. But as soon as the taller officer handed him a manila envelope, the smile dropped. Isabella appeared. Next, her expression sharp like she'd walked into a room ready to win an argument. But when the officer turned to speak to her directly, something flickered in her eyes. A split second of uncertainty. From my seat, I couldn't hear a word, but I didn't need to. I'd seen enough interviews between law enforcement and executives to know the rhythm. Identification, explanation, request to speak privately. And then Robert made the first mistake of the day. He gestured toward the executive conference room, glass walls and all. If you're trying to hide panic, you don't choose a fishbowl. While they disappeared into the conference room, my mind rewound to the last 6 months. It had started with smaller requests. $5,000 to a creative strategist Isabella met at an art gala. $12,000 to cover event sponsorship for a charity shared, which somehow never appeared on the charity's ledger. Time I'd filed them in a separate folder, non-standard payment requests with dates, amounts, and the exact wording of my refusals. By November the numbers had grown. $40,000 for consultation on luxury branding billed from a company whose website had been registered only 2 weeks earlier. $78,000 performance bonus wired to a marketing contractor whose contract had expired 3 months prior. And now $250,000 to a consulting firm with no paperwork, no contract and no history. The glass conference room door opened. Officers stepped out first, their faces neutral. Robert followed, no longer the unshakable CEO. His jaw was tight, eyes downcast. Isabella trailed behind, pale but composed. Too composed. That's when I knew she still thought she could talk her way out of it. My phone lit up again. Jenna there. Asking for files, finance records, vendor payments, all of them. She didn't move. I wasn't ready to insert myself into this mess. Not yet. Instead I pulled my laptop from my bag and opened the encrypted drive I'd kept for months. Every questionable payment request. Every backdated invoice. Every time Robert had CC'd Isabella instead of the CFO. And then there was the other folder, emails, external counsel, the one containing correspondence between Robert and a private law firm. I'd only seen fragments, but they were enough to suggest something serious. Possible misrepresentation to investors. At 10:46 a.m., the officers left with a thick stack of printed documents and a USB drive in an evidence bag. Robert didn't walk them out. Neither did Isabella. 10 minutes later, Jenna texted again. Jenna, board's here. Emergency meeting. Emergency board meetings in the middle of a workday are never about good news. By noon, word had already spread beyond the building. Finance news blogs were buzzing about possible compliance concerns at Hartley International. Someone inside must have leaked to the press. And judging by how fast it hit, the leak hadn't come from an outsider. It had come from someone with access to the boardroom. I closed my laptop and stared at my reflection in the cafe window. I wasn't surprised. For weeks, I'd known something like this was coming. You can't move that much money that quietly without someone noticing. And people like Isabella always assume the rules don't apply until someone knocks on the glass. By late afternoon, I got one more message from Jenna. Robert Ken led all his afternoon meetings. Isabella left the building in tears. I let the phone rest on the table. The day before, I'd walked out with a cardboard box and no job. Today it was the Hartleys who were cornered, but I knew better than to celebrate. Because if there's one thing I've learned in corporate life, it's that desperate people with power are the most dangerous of all. And the Hartleys weren't finished. Not yet. The morning after the police visit, I expected silence, maybe even a few days of corporate chaos before anyone remembered to come after me. I was wrong. At 8:04 a.m. my phone rang. Unknown number. Let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later another call. Same number. Answered. Eva, it's Mark reading. The name made my shoulders tighten. Mark was Hartley International's in-house legal counsel. Technically my boss's boss when it came to compliance matters. We'd spoken before but never socially. We need to meet, he said. His tone was clipped, almost rehearsed. Today. Took a breath. What's this about? I'd rather not say over the phone. That's lawyer code for it's about. We met in the back corner of a quiet coffee shop near the courthouse. Mark was already there, suit jacket folded over the chair, tie loosened, not his usual polished look. Eva, he began, sliding a thin folder across the table. You're being named in an internal review. I didn't touch the folder. For what? No operation on executive directives. I almost laughed. Is that the new term for refusing to process undocumented transfers? Mark didn't smile. They're building a case that you were insubordinate, that you intentionally obstructed company operations. Leaned back. This is Isabella's doing. It's coming from the top, he said, carefully. And they're adding something else, suggesting you leaked information to the police yesterday. That one hit harder. That's not true. No, he said, lowering his voice. But proving a negative is hard. And they're not trying to win a court case here. They're trying to make you radioactive so no one will hire you. For a few seconds I just stared at him. The hiss of the espresso machine filling the silence. This was exactly the kind of counterattack I'd feared. Not direct, not provable, just enough to plant seeds of doubt in the right ears. What's my play here? Asked finally. Mark hesitated, then nodded toward the folder. Inside are copies of internal memos. You'll want to see who CC'd on them. Opened it. 3 memos, all addressed to the board, all suggesting urgent review of my handling of financial requests. And each one conveniently leaving out the lack of documentation, the missing vendor records, the red flags I'd raised. Every memo was signed by Robert Hartley, and every single one CC'd the head of the board's audit committee. Man I knew from experience valued appearances above truth. This is their opening move, Mark said. If you respond emotionally, you play right into their narrative. I'm not responding emotionally, I said. I'm responding strategically. Good, he said, standing. Because you're going to need allies. That afternoon, I made my first call to someone I hadn't spoken to in months. Daniel Price, a former senior auditor who'd left Hartley International quietly after budget cuts 2 years ago. In reality, Daniel had left because he'd clashed with Robert over creative accounting practices. When I told him about the memos, he didn't sound surprised. They're laying groundwork, he said. Same thing they did with me. File half true, let them sit in the record, then when the moment comes they say, "See, we warned you. Did you fight it?" "I didn't have the stomach for it," Daniel admitted. You're different. You've got documentation." By early evening I had calls scheduled. With 2 more people who'd left under suspicious circumstances. One from compliance, one from procurement. Both had stories that mirrored mine. Questionable directives, pushback, sudden termination patterns. The board couldn't ignore if presented the right way. But I also knew I had to move carefully. If Robert or Isabella caught wind that I was building a coalition, they'd double down on the smear campaign. At 9:15 p.m. my phone buzzed with a message from Jenna. "HR's drafting an official statement about your termination. They're saying, you violated confidentiality." That one made my jaw clench. Confidentiality is the golden bullet in corporate disputes. Big enough to mean anything. Serious enough to scare away future employers. Type back quickly. If they release that statement, I'll respond publicly. Her reply came fast. "They're betting you won't." I stared at the screen for a long moment. They were right at least 4. Well, if I went public too soon, it would look like retaliation. But if I waited too long, the narrative would harden. By midnight, I'd decided on my next move. I wasn't going to fight this in the press. Not yet. I was going to fight it in the boardroom because, while Robert and Isabella were busy trying to bury me under memos and rumors, they'd forgotten one important fact. The same files that could clear my name could also bury them. And I had all of them. 2 days after my meeting with Mark, I was ready to make my move. Not a grand, cinematic reveal. That's not how real corporate takedowns happen. No, the most effective blows land quietly in places where the target doesn't realize they're bleeding until it's too late. I started with Marta Clean, the head of compliance at Hartley International. Marta had a reputation for being meticulous, but she also had a survival instinct. She knew when to distance herself from trouble. If I could get her to even look at my files, I knew the chain reaction would begin. I called her personal number. "Marta, it's Eva." I heard about what happened. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said. "But you won't be if you keep ignoring the payments Robert's been authorizing through Isabella." Silence, then carefully. "I don't know what you mean." "You do," I said. "Your internal vendor ledger for transfers over $25,000 in the last 12 months. Cross-reference with active contracts. And when you do, you'll find one name repeated. The consulting firm. Isabella wanted me to pay." I could almost hear her brain moving. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because if you don't get ahead of it, you'll be the one holding the bag when the auditors come." Another long pause. "Email me what you have." "No email," I said firmly. "Meet me off-site." We met the next afternoon at a small wine bar. Tucked into a side street, the kind of place you could talk for an hour without seeing a single colleague walk by. Slid a flash drive across the table. Marta plugged it into her laptop and began scrolling. Payment requests with no contracts. Vendor accounts registered weeks before invoices were submitted. Amounts just under thresholds that required board approval. She closed the laptop after 10 minutes. "If this is real, it's real," I said. She exhaled sharply. "Then Robert's in serious violation and Isabella is a liability." I finished for her. Looked at me over the rim of her glass. "I'll start a preliminary review quietly." Next, I reached out to David Samuels, a board member I'd worked with during the European expansion. David was one of the few directors who actually dug into the numbers instead of rubber stamping reports. I didn't send him files, I sent him questions. "Are you aware of unverified vendor payments initiated by the CEO's family members? Have you reviewed compliance flags from finance in the past year? Do you know how many high V-value contracts have been reassigned without board discussion?" David called me within an hour. "Eva, what's going on?" "Ask Robert," I said, "then compare his answers to the audit log." By the end of the week, I could feel the temperature in the Hartley building shifting, even from the inside. Jenna told me that Marta had been camped out in the compliance office, pulling records with a locked door. 2 board members had requested clarification on recent expenditures, and Isabella had gone uncharacteristically quiet, but Robert wasn't sitting still. On Friday afternoon, Jenna texted, "Jenna, Robert's been in HR all day. Looks tense." That was never good. HR meetings in tense times meant 2 things: settlements or scapegoats. Sure enough, on Monday morning, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. It was Alison Pierce, an employment attorney. "Eva," she began, "I've been retained to discuss a potential resolution to your termination." I knew what that meant. Hush money. Settlement with a non-disclosure clause so ironclad that even mentioning its existence could cost me everything. "Alison," I said, "unless that resolution includes a public correction of their statements about me, I'm not interested." "That won't be possible," she replied smoothly. "Then neither is this conversation." By Tuesday, the pressure inside the company was starting to boil. Marta called me from her car, voice low. "Don't know what you set in motion, but the board's finance subcommittee is convening tomorrow. They've pulled every transaction over $10,000 from the last 2 years. Robert's not happy." "Good," I said. "He shouldn't be." "Eva," she said cautiously, "you realize if this blows, it's not just them. Some of these payments went through with other managers' sign-off." "That's their problem," I said. "I refuse to be part of it." "That's the difference." That night, I sat at my kitchen table reviewing my own notes. It struck me that I wasn't just trying to clear my name anymore. Somewhere along the way, this had become about cleaning out an infection the company had been living with for years. It was also when I realized something else. I had one last card to play. The police who had shown up in the lobby that morning, they hadn't been there on a random tip. They'd been there because an outside party had raised a formal complaint tied to possible misappropriation of corporate funds. I knew exactly who that outside party was. And if the Hartleys didn't know yet, they were about to. By the time the finance subcommittee met the next morning, I was ready. Because the thing about feeding a fire is that once it's burning hot enough, you don't need to push. You just stand back and watch. The finance subcommittee met at 8:30 a.m. on a rainy Wednesday, the kind of gray that turns glass towers into mirrors. I watched people file in from across the street. Board members, 2 executive assistants with binders, Marta from compliance with a wheeled case, and a pair of suits I didn't recognize. At 8:42, I got a text from Jenna. "Different vibe today. External auditor is here." 2 of them. Not our in-house. Our external auditors. That meant the board had moved past internal review into protect the board's reputation. By 9 a.m., the conference room shades were down. I couldn't see a thing. I closed my laptop and tried not to rehearse answers I hadn't been asked. At 9:27, my phone lit up with a number I didn't have saved. "Eva Patterson," a woman asked. Calm voice, professional. "Yes, this is Helen Ward from Kendrick and Low Counsel to the board's finance subcommittee. We're conducting an independent inquiry into recent payments and governance issues. The subcommittee would like to hear from you today." Let beat pass. "Am I a witness or a target, Miss Ward?" "A witness," she said. "We'll put that in writing before you speak. Then I'll come with one condition." Said. "The company retracts the memo implying I violated confidentiality. I can't promise communications outcomes," she replied. "But I can put your request on the record. We'll also provide anti-retaliation protection in writing. Can you be here by 11? I hung up and stared out the cafe window. I'd spent weeks refusing to go public because I knew how fast narratives harden. Today, someone else had opened the door. I was going to walk through it carefully. They badged me in at 10:56. Security guard I didn't recognize escorted me to a smaller conference room 2 doors down from the main boardroom. Smelled like coffee and dry erase markers. On the table a picture of water, a digital recorder, and a bound packet with my name on the cover. Helen Ward shook my hand. Early 50s, steel hair, no wasted words. Beside her sat a man who introduced himself as Alan Pierce, forensic partner from the audit firm. Before we begin, Helen said, sliding a document to me. This letter confirms you're appearing as a witness. It includes a non-retaliation provision and states you will have access to your personnel file upon request. I read every line. I initialed each page. Then I finally looked up. Ask what you need to ask. Alan started. Miss Patterson, walk us through the February 3rd transfer request. Kept it clean. Isabella Hartley asked me to wire $250,000 to a consulting firm with no vendor ID, no contract, and no scope of work. I refused and asked for documentation. I was terminated the next morning for loss of trust. Do you have records of prior requests of this nature? Alan asked. I nodded toward my bag. I brought a drive. Payment requests over $10,000 for entities with no vetting, invoices submitted just under approval thresholds, and emails where compliance checks were bypassed by direct instruction from the CEO. Helen's pen paused. Direct instruction. Robert Hartley CC'd me and the controller on at least 4 of them. Said I flagged each one. The flags were ignored or reassigned. Did you raise concerns outside of finance? I met her eyes. 2 weeks before I was terminated, I submitted an anonymous report through the external auditor's ethics hotline, attaching a subset of files. I also requested the report be routed to the board's audit chair. Alan leaned forward. You submitted to our hotline. I did. He exhaled through his nose, not quite a mail. That answers a question I had. Helen glanced at him, then back to me. Just so we're clear, you did not contact law enforcement directly. No, said. I preserved documents. I used your hotline. That's it. It was the truth, and the part I'd been waiting to say out loud. The police who appeared in reception hadn't been summoned by me. They were there because an external process had tripped into motion, one that didn't need my name attached to it. Alan set his notepad down. Miss Patterson, our preliminary review found multiple payments to a cluster of entities with common beneficial ownership incorporated through a formation service in Delaware. Within a 30-day window, one of those entities matches the one you were asked to pay. Who owns them? Yes. We're still tracing, he said. But there's a nominee director connected to a family office that does work for the Hartleys. I didn't react. I didn't need to. Helen took over. We also have an internal memo from Mr. Hartley to the audit chair suggesting you obstructed operations. I've read it. I said it omits context. That there was no vendor record, no contract, no compliance sign-off. Well, capture that now, she said and clicked the recorder on. Please state your name and position for the record. I did. Then for the next 40 minutes, I answered questions like I had built a map. Dates, amounts, email subjects, who was in the room. No adjectives, no speeches, just facts you can hang your hat on. Near the end, Helen closed her binder. 2 final points, she said. First, your request for a retraction will be put to the board. Second, would you be willing to meet with law enforcement if asked? Yes, I said, with counsel. Understood, she said. Thank you, Miss Patterson. When I stepped into the hall, the door to the main boardroom was open a few inches. I heard voices, low, controlled, then Isabella's cut through like glass. She's lying. She's been after me since day 1. You all know that. Silence. Then another voice, older, measured. David Samuels. We know the payments, Miss Hartley. The ledger doesn't lie. I didn't wait to hear more. I walked to the elevator and pressed the button with a steady hand. My phone buzzed before the doors closed. Jenna, you lit a fuse. Me. I didn't. Their own systems did. What? Mid-afternoon, the building had a pulse I could feel from the sidewalk. Two IT managers rolled carts past reception, followed by one of the external auditors. Forensic imaging standard when a board decides to preserve evidence. Courier arrived with a sealed envelope. Minutes later, Marta stepped out of the elevator, eyes red but jaw set. Me through the glass and gave the smallest nod. At 3:12 p.m., my email pinged with a message from Helen. Subject: Interim actions. Ava, the board has placed Mr. Hartley on administrative leave pending completion of the independent review. Miss Hartley is suspended from all operational duties. Effective immediately. We will be in touch regarding your employment record. I read it twice. I didn't smile. This wasn't vindication. It was triage. At 3:27 p.m., my phone rang again. Whoa. Caller ID. Ava, Robert's voice said, rougher than I had ever heard it. Need to talk. There's nothing to talk about, I said. You don't understand. What you've set in motion, he snapped. You're going to burn this place down. I didn't set anything in motion, I said quietly. You did when you decided. Rules were optional. He said nothing for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted from threat to plea. Tell them I authorized those payments for strategic reasons. Tell them you misunderstood. I told them the truth, I said. And I'll keep doing that. He exhaled hard. You think they'll save you? When this hits the press, you'll be a headline for 24 hours and a liability forever. I looked out at the street. A woman dragging a suitcase through puddles. A bike courier balancing coffee trays. Kid kicking a paper cup. Life moving forward without permission from any CEO. I'm not asking anyone to save me. I said I'm asking this company to be what it claims to be. I ended the call. At 5:02 p.m., a statement hit the company website. Board of Hartley International has engaged independent counsel and our external auditors to conduct a review of certain vendor payments. The CEO will be on leave during this process. We remain committed to transparency and ethical practices. 2 minutes later, my phone buzzed one. Last time that day. A number I knew by heart. Eva Michelle Tan, our largest European client. We saw the statement. I need to know two things. Are you safe? And are the people who signed off on this still in charge? I'm fine, I said. No. Good, she replied. Then we're not pulling our contracts. Not yet. Eva, she paused. If they try to spin this, we'll walk. They won't, I said. Not this time. When I hung up, I finally let the breath out of my chest. Not victory. Not yet. But air that didn't taste like fear. I packed my bag and stepped into the rain without opening my umbrella. Felt right to be wet, to feel the day on my skin. Tomorrow would be the reckoning. Document trails, ownership. Charts, signatures under a magnifying glass. And something else the board hadn't seen yet. The P-side held back. Until someone asked the right question. Because there was one thread still buried in the ledger. One that didn't point to Isabella at all. It pointed past her. The next morning the rain had cleared, but the air felt heavy. The kind that warns you a storm isn't far. I'd barely poured my coffee when my phone rang. It was Helen Ward. Eva, she said, the subcommittee wants to see the rest of your files. I didn't ask how she knew there was. Or she was too good at her job not to suspect I'd held something back. I'll bring them, I said. But you need to understand this thread doesn't stop at Isabella. There was a pause. Then I suggest you get here before the full board meets. By 9:15 I was in the same small conference room as before. This time, Alan from the audit firm looked almost impatient. What are we about to see? Yes. Slid the final folder across the table. Not a flash drive this time, but hard copies. Some things are better read on paper when you want the weight of them to be felt. These, I began, are records from the European expansion contracts, vendor accounts that looked legitimate except they were shell companies with one shared managing director. The director happens to be an old business partner of Robert Hartley. Helen's brows knitted. You're saying these weren't just Isabella's personal projects? No, I said Isabella's consulting firm. Stunt was sloppy. These were calculated payments routed through a network of companies billed as overseas compliance or cultural liaison services. Total over 18 months, $3.4 million. Alan flipped through the invoices, his pen tapping the table, and the services were never rendered. I shook my head. I cross-checked every claim. Deliverable. Not one document, not one report, not one meeting log exists. Helen leaned back. Do you have proof Robert knew these were his associates' companies? Yes, I said, sliding over the last page. An internal email where Robert tells the procurement manager to process through the Dublin vendor. They're trusted. The Dublin vendor is one of the shells. The managing director is on the Articles of Incorporation. For a moment, the room was quiet except for the soft whir of the HVAC. Then Helen closed the folder. This changes the scope, she said. Significantly. Ellen nodded. We'll need to confront him with this today. Helen looked at me. Would you be willing to be in the room? I thought about it for a beat. Yes, but I'm not here for theater. I'll answer their questions, nothing more. At 10:03, I was led into the main boardroom for the first time in my career. 12 directors, serious faces. Robert Hartley sat at the far end, his tie looser than usual, eyes fixed on the table. Isabella wasn't there. Helen opened. Mr. Hartley, the auditors have identified a pattern of vendor payments tied to your former business partner. We have documentation linking these entities directly to your instructions. Robert looked up sharply. That's absurd. These vendors provided valuable international expertise. Then where are the deliverables? Ellen asked. Because we have invoices but no work product. Robert's jaw tightened. You don't understand how international operations work. I do, I said, my voice cutting through for the first time. And I know the difference between a legitimate vendor and a mailbox in Dublin. His head snapped toward me. Helen raised a hand. Eva is here as a factual witness. She provided records showing there was no vetting process, no compliance checks, and no deliverables. Do you dispute that? Robert didn't answer. The chairman of the board leaned forward. Robert, the amounts involved, the lack of documentation, and the personal connection to these entities, this is a breach of your fiduciary duty. Combined with the matter involving your daughter, the board has no choice. He turned to Helen. Draft the resolution. Robert finally spoke, voice low. We'll regret this, all of you. But the fight had gone from his eyes. 11:20, the decision was unanimous. Robert Hartley was removed as CEO. Effective immediately. Isabella's suspension became a termination. The statement would go public that afternoon. Helen walked me back to the small conference room. Ava, the board has also agreed to fully clear your record, including a public acknowledgement that your termination was unfounded. Nodded. Thank you. You should also know, she added. Several directors have expressed interest in you returning in a senior capacity. I'll think about it, I said, and I meant. I'd spent weeks fighting for my name, not for a title. That afternoon I sat in my apartment, with the statement open on my laptop. The words were careful but clear. Board of Hartley International has accepted the resignation of Robert Hartley and terminated the employment of Isabella Hartley following an independent review into vendor payment practices. We thank Eva Patterson for her cooperation in this matter and regret the circumstances of her departure. My phone buzzed. Michelle Tan again. She said. Is the place safe to do business with now? It's on its way, Good. Then we'll stay. By evening the news had spread. Industry. Blogs, LinkedIn posts, even a short piece in the financial press. The Hartley name was mud in corporate circles. I didn't celebrate. This wasn't about gloating. It was about closing a chapter without leaving rot behind. I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window, watching the city lights blink on. The message was simple. Rules apply to everyone. Nepotism and arrogance can buy time but not immunity. Eventually the ledger tells the truth. And if you're the one holding the ledger, you'd better have the courage to open it. That was the difference between me and the Hartleys. I didn't burn the company down. I held the match until they lit it themselves.